This is DBrief, brought to you by the Australian Industry Group.
Welcome back to DBrief, the podcast where we explain policy to industry and industry to policymakers. I'm Louise McGrath, Head of Industry Development and Policy at the Australian Industry Group, and today I'm joined by Lee Hickin, National AI Centre Executive Director, or NAIC. The original naming of this podcast came about because of what we call the 3Ds: decarbonisation, diversification and digitalisation, being the big policy challenges for industry and policymakers in the next decade. And today we're firmly in the digitalisation discussion with artificial intelligence. Lee, welcome to DBrief.
Thank you.
Before we get into AI policy and adoption, let's talk a bit about you. You've spent 30 years in tech, from IBM to AWS and Microsoft. What was the moment you realised AI was going to be the defining shift in your career, assuming it is, rather than just the next wave?
Well, thank you. It's a little bit more than 30 years, but let's go with 30 because that sounds nice and round. Well, first of all, did I realise AI was the defining moment? I think like a lot of defining moments, Louise, I didn't know it until afterwards and you have the opportunity to reflect back. But look, yes, I've been very privileged to be in a lot of lucky times and lucky places, as you mentioned, IBM, Tivoli, and a predominant of my Amazon and Microsoft, but predominantly in Microsoft. And to your question, look, in 2014, I took a role in Microsoft. I was an engineer by trade, and I'd sort of worked my way through sort of engineering, software consulting, sales, and then I found myself in product management. And I'd been given the product management portfolio for IoT, the Internet of Things at the time. But they'd sort of tacked onto it this thing called Project Oxford, which was Microsoft's first AI suite of tools. This was the sort of early Azure Voice, something called LUIS, the language understanding system. Kind of pretty early phase, obviously where we find ourselves now in generative AI. But I didn't really think much about it. It was just this technology. I was actually more interested in IoT. And I'll tell you this, I'll tell you the brief version, but in 2022, in and around October time, so if you remember November 2022, November 30th, 2022, in fact, at ChatGPT moment, around October time, I was the chief technology officer at the time. I had been sort of dabbling with GPT-2 as it was part of the Microsoft we had it in the Azure suite in the early stages. It was quite sort of, it didn't have the profile it had then. And I remember saying to my boss at the time, I said, look, I've been the CTO at that point for about 5 years. I was like, we've been banging this AI drum for so long. It's not really going anywhere. No one's really kind of grasping it, and it's not making the market we want it to do. Maybe we should pivot and look at what can we do around, say, the quantum piece, or maybe we should get deeper into some other areas. Of course, 30 days later, I was proved to be somewhat wrong in my assessment. And I look back fondly and think to myself, gosh, I nearly said, you know what, let's not bother. So I guess probably that's when I not so much realize the wave, but when I have this sort of reflection back to think like that was a moment when I just hadn't realized just how much was coming in this ChatGPT moment. And for me, that real moment of like, this is something unique is actually with GPT-4, with the voice mode for GPT-4, when that was released, but it wasn't released publicly and we had access to it in Microsoft. And I was sitting right here where I am at my desk today. I had GPT-4 on my phone, and I fired up the voice mode to have a chat to it. And I don't know if you remember, but early on, things like you could interrupt it and you could talk to it and then interrupt it as it was responding. And I was having this conversation and I sat there after about 15 minutes and I had that moment of like almost an audible gasp in my mind of like, oh, wow, that was disconnecting. I'd stopped thinking about this being technology and started thinking about my experience with this. So that was when I realized this was something unique.
Yeah, and that you're right, that it was the moment the whole world took notice. And a lot of people think that's the start of AI, but of course, AI's been around for years.
Yes.
And
yeah, for sure.
Us in the know always lecture everyone. So then you did make the jump from Microsoft to public service and to head up the National AI Centre. What convinced you to leave that role and to leave big tech to head into public service?
I don't know that. Look, I'd been thinking, to be honest with you, at that point, I've been at Microsoft coming up for nearly 19 years. I think like most things in life, and certainly as you get older and you feel like you've done something for so long that you wonder if you can do something else and do something different. And you kind of start to seek that expansion of, is this me or is there more to it? I'd never really thought about public sector, though. I mean, I've been in big tech companies all my working life. I've never been in public sector. And so in some ways it was a case of they spent a lot of time convincing me it was a good idea for me to do in the process of being headhunted, so to speak. But also, I think from my own point of view, being at Microsoft, at that time I was in the responsible AI team, and I was the AI sort of tech policy lead for the national worldwide tech policy lead. I was traveling a lot, getting involved in stuff, but I was going to America and seeing what was going on there a lot. I went to Seattle multiple times, and then I'd come back to Australia and sort of get this pent up frustration in my mind of we're not doing enough. There's not enough ambition happening here, not enough optimism about this. And so you kind of have that, and then this opportunity presents itself, and you sort of go, well, I can either keep complaining about it, or I can maybe step into a role where I have an opportunity to be part of the solution. And so, like most people who enter into public service, you feel like you want to be part of something bigger than just perhaps the things that you do, but maybe you have a bigger impact on the world. So that's what got me there.
Well, we certainly welcomed the creation of NAIC because we felt that there was a need, to, as you say, lift the ambition, lift the enthusiasm for AI. But I must admit, I do sometimes struggle when a member says to me, well, what does the AI Centre do for me? How would you answer that question, or how should I be answering that question?
Yeah, it's the number of times since I joined, which is like maybe a year and a half ago now, and I've put my hand up in rooms and said, hey, people, put your hand up if you know what the NAIC is. And, there's like one hand out of 100 people, and you sort of get a sense that it's not clear. So what I've tried to do is I try and describe what the NAIC does in the context of three things to people, or three words. And this shows my background in big tech, because they like the alliteration and they like the simplicity of letters and words. So I talk about confidence, clarity, and capability. But in the terms of the NAIC, what does that mean? It means the confidence is about the NAIC is here to show Australia what's possible with AI, give them the confidence to do things. The clarity is about making that risk that has become the sort of the overbearing inhibitor of movement in AI, because we all see the risk, make that risk clearer, so provide clarity to that, and then help make your journey to being able to use AI achievable by building your capability. So capability, clarity, and confidence is kind of how I frame it. But we're here to help people adopt AI in very simple terms.
Yeah, and I think together we've been running all these workshops around the country, getting a lot of enthusiasm, and we can really start to see the difference now after about a year and a half. But as I say, a lot of the conversation in Australia has been around the risk, and the flip side of that is the responsible use of AI, and that is your background.
Yes.
The National AI Plan talks about keeping Australians safe through frameworks that mitigate harms while promoting responsible practices. So in plain English, what does responsible AI mean for the average mid-sized Australian manufacturer or services business? Beyond, how do they put it into practice rather than just having the policy on the intranet?
Yeah. Okay. So just as an adjunct to that piece, a lot at the time at Microsoft when I was there, and not suggesting Microsoft was first in any way in this, but they were pretty early innovators. Around 2018 and 2019, they were thinking about this approach. And there was lots of conversations about what do we call this? Because, it was trusted AI, it was ethical AI, it was safe AI, all of these things. And a lot of work went into landing on this word responsible, which seems to have permeated as a sort of a standardized term, at least for now. I think there's a bit of a shifting tide around it. But it started because what it implied was it's something you actively have to take ownership of as a person, as a human being in the loop. You have to be responsible. We can't. It's easy to kind of assume ethics are individual. Trust is something that you earn, that you can't actually enforce upon something. It has to be earned. And so in that context, to me, it's really simple. Doing responsible AI is about doing the right thing. And what I mean by that in more practical terms is building up that muscle of practices in how you operate systems of technology that integrate with AI in a way that it's second nature to you to think about the concerns that might surface when you use AI. We shouldn't have to stop and go, oh, we're using AI. We should think about the data governance. We should think about the source of the data. We should think about the risks. We should think about the harms. These should be base practices. That's being responsible. And then you build on top of that standards and regulations and other things. But when I think about responsible AI, I mean, I'm actually talking about the humans, not the AI, is the truth there.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to pick up on. It sounds like it's still very human-centered.
Very much so.
As a practice, rather than just policy or just technology.
Yes.
Humans have to be...
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, in the mix. Now, there is a voluntary AI safety standard out in the market. And there's been a couple of iterations, and I think the current iteration, I think, is more targeted and more useful. And I think, there's still a bit of debate on whether there should be mandatory guardrails for what's deemed high risk, but I think, again, that's a little bit in the eye of the beholder.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've said that AI needs guardrails to protect society, but AI also needs flexibility to address the global issues.
Yes.
How do you hold that tension within government right now?
How do you hold the tension is one thing, and then within government adds another layer of the sort of the challenge to that. So you're absolutely right. There was a thing called the Voluntary AI Safety Standard, or the VASE, as it got sort of referred to. And one of the first things I wanted to do, and I was sort of involved in as an outside body in helping the NAIC at the time develop that VASE. The problem with the VASE was it was a great piece of work, and all kudos to the team before me and the people that built that. But it was hugely complicated, 160 steps that were required to complete. It extended far beyond what I would call that governance of AI. It was almost good governance. It wasn't really AI governance. And so, the first thing we wanted to do is simplify it because, to your point about holding the tension, you have to if you're going to ask people to take steps towards new practices, governance, which becomes new practices, you have to do two things. You have to make them achievable and, viable for the business at whatever scale the business is at. But you also have to dangle a reward in front of you. Like, why would I go to all the challenges of building these governance practices if ultimately I get out of it nothing, or there's no conceivable reward? So the first thing we did was simplify it down to the AI6, or the guidance for AI adoption, which went from 160 things down to 6 things without really losing any of the fidelity of what's really important around transparency, accountability, ownership, and sort of reporting and understanding what you're doing. That remains in place. But the tension is maintained by always having a conversation about risk with a conversation about opportunity. Always being ensured that whatever you're having to do, which becomes this burden, I'm not suggesting that governance is always a burden, but at its first iteration, when you add it to someone's processes, it's a burden because they weren't doing it before, and now you're asking them to do it. So that balance is the trade-off, or is the balancing of the tension is, hey, do this, get this. This is what you need to do, but this governance only needs to be this big for your organization because your risks are lower. But for a different kind of organization, the burden is heavier, but the reward is probably heavier. And I think it's just getting into the realities of that trade-off, as opposed to getting caught up in the sort of hyperbole, sort of large-scale narrative that exists on AI, which is about huge existential risks and massive untapped opportunity. And there's nothing in between. And that's I think is actually where the real work gets done, is the sort of the boring bit in the middle, when you do a bit of work and you get some reward.
Yeah, that's it. And also just thinking about the return on investment for companies. If we load it all up, then that's a much longer time frame, which makes them more hesitant.
And interestingly, yes, because so I joined in 2025, I guess it would have been early 25. And at that point, the voluntary AI safety standard had been around for a couple of years, I think. And the first conversations I had with customers as I joined the National AI Centre was a few customers that would say to me, right, we've just kind of get our head around this voluntary standard. We've figured out what we need to do it. We're about to start on it. So that tells you that if it takes you 2.5 years to kind of figure this out, then it's not fit for purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, we tried to implement it initially within Australian Industry Group. And yes, there's 116 steps. And one step could be writing a whole new policy on something. So it wasn't
these were little steps. These were big things.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And still on the theme of safety, there is the new Australian AI Safety Institute. So that's, I understand, is going to monitor, test and share information on AI technologies. So how does that work alongside NAIC? Does it give people confidence, or is it also feeding into the fear aspect?
So really that balance of the feed the fear, but also resolve the fear. That's a really difficult balance to do. So just to be clear, the AI Safety Institute is now stood up and it operates inside government. It is there to monitor, test, and sort of understand the risks of frontier and forthcoming AI. But its job is really to inform government on the mechanisms by which appropriate, if at all, guardrails or regulation should be enforced. And it tries to do that sectorally as opposed to across the board. So, the AC will figure out what the potential risks are of, Babel 6, Babel 7. And it will feed that information into ASIC or TGA or whatever the regulatory authorities are, and they'll look at it from the lens of that particular sector. But where we work together, because there's in some ways the AC's work is about protecting us from what's coming in the future, but we also have to live in the today. And the NAICS work is much more about what's happening today in industry. So what we might find is, and time will tell because we've only just really established the AC, is that they will do their work. We will feed off that work. And as we see interesting research from the AC that says, this particular new model, class of models, class of technologies are prone to a particular risk or infiltration or a certain type of attack, we might convert that into industry guidance that says, okay, as you move into frontier models and you start to think about agentic systems, if you're using these technologies, additional guidance, the AI6 is you need to do X, Y, and Z. So we sort of work symbiotically, but we'll talk about it in the today and how industry can do it. The AC will be talking about, deeply scientific and research-led and into the future. Does that kind of make sense? Is sort of the two work that way, yeah.
And I think it's smart to work with individual regulators. I think, initially there was talk of Australia having a sort of a universal AI Act that would affect all regulation, all legislation sort of uniformly. I think this strategy of empowering individual regulators to work within their sphere where there is real risk is much more sensible, pragmatic.
Well, I hope so. That's certainly the direction we think that makes the most sense.
Yeah. And the thing is, with robo-debt and a few other sort of very high-profile incidents, a lot of our members are telling us they're nervous about being first, worried. Normally we want first mover advantage is a good thing, but no one wants to be first with the reputational risk, IP breaches, data sovereignty. So what's your message to a CEO who's still sitting on their hands 2026?
Yeah, and it's funny you frame it that way because obviously, yes, first mover advantage is key. And typically Australia has been quite a first mover in most technology waves, and we've certainly moved faster than other developed countries of our equal size and shape. So it is a bit strange that we're seeing that in this case. So what would I say? Look, okay, the way I think about it is this. I don't necessarily know why, but we know CEOs and large executives and boards generally, they deal with risk every single day. The way you operate a business every day is make a decision with a balanced view of the risk. Should I invest here? Should I attempt this? Should I try this campaign? What if we pivot our product or market to this? So that's actually being a boss. That's kind of how you do it. But that ability to balance both sides of the equation is typically how you do that. You know what's at stake, you know what you can achieve, and you make a sort of an informed decision. So I would say to any CEO who is sort of sitting on this and not taking that first move advantage is sitting on your hands, so to speak, is not taking you in any direction. You won't fail, but you also won't succeed. And so if we look at how businesses dealt with cybersecurity, it's a sort of an extreme example, but the companies that didn't realize the risk of cybersecurity, and that was more risk as opposed to opportunity-based, the ones that didn't appreciate the risk were the ones that found themselves falling foul of cyber incidents. And so I would say that there's nothing to lose by attempting this, but there's a lot to lose by just assuming the risk is too great to even attempt.
Yeah, it's always that balance of, as you say, opportunity and risk.
And I get it. It's tough because in order to take that risk, you need to have the information you need. And that's perhaps a further question and conversation. But that is, you should be seeking that out if you're a CEO. If you feel like all you feel is risk and you don't know what you're going to get, then that's your blind spot. Go seek that out.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice segue, Lee, into the second half of the podcast where we'll talk about capability building and how we lift that across Australia. But we'll take a break, come back in a moment.
Cool. Thank you.
You're listening to the DBrief podcast, brought to you by Australian Industry Group. To find out more about how Australian Industry Group can help your business, visit australianindustrygroup.com.au.
And welcome back to DBrief. I'm talking to Lee Hickin, who is Executive Director of NAIC, the National AI Centre. And we're now going to talk a bit about how we lift capability across Australia. The RBA's recent research found nearly 40% of Australian firms have only minimal AI use, and it's pretty basic. It's just Copilot or ChatGPT for emails during research, so not groundbreaking. And that tracks with what AI group members are also telling us. Only about 50% in our last survey said they were investing in it, and that's because they were worried about regulation and that was inhibiting investment. But I think that's now been resolved, as we've talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But why is adoption still so shallow? Where's the real blockage? Is it in skills? Is it in trust? Is it in infrastructure? Or is there some other secret source we're missing?
Look, I think if anything, I'd sort of orientate towards the trust point, but let's just sort of pack that out a bit. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, there is data, as you said. I mean, the RBA's report absolutely shines a light on the fact that, broadly speaking, Australia is a huge adopter of AI. I think it's Anthropic's report puts us as the fourth per capita country in the world, behind sort of Israel, Singapore, and US, I think. Same with OpenAI. I think we're in the top 7 for OpenAI. By all measures, we are using a lot of AI, but we're not using it in ways that actually are productive or economically developing outcomes and value that we see. And, to your point, the shallow usage of it. Now, the question as to why, it's not about access, because we have access to all the tools. This is not a conversation about sovereignty or what we have, what's here in Australia. If we want an AI tool in Australia, it's largely here. It's not about necessarily digital access, because I think, whilst we could argue about the Australian digital divide, we're talking about people that are already in that digital ecosystem. So my sense of where this is coming from is this blockage around trust, but it's not in the sense that, we do have a low trust. I mean, I think the University of Melbourne report from a year or two ago, it was very clear on that point that we don't have trust, and other reports have pointed to that. What I'm feeling is the gap goes back a little bit to our other point. If you are, as a business leader, if you are not confident that AI generates value to your business and all you understand is it generates a potential risk, then you're not going to give empowerment to your team and your people to explore what AI can do for you. And until that's happening, you have this sort of starvation of the business, of the willingness and the appetite to explore AI. So what we find is there are people using AI at work secretly, shadow AI usage, as we've sort of stolen from shadow IT kind of the world. And I think that's fundamentally where it is currently sitting. Is it's not for lack of the tools, the capability, or the ability to do all the things. It's a lack of confidence and a lack of permission in business leaders being given to businesses, because the opportunity that AI presents isn't something that a boardroom and a bunch of executives are going to dream up in their meetings. It actually it's deep in the business. It's often in those sort of minute and day processes, the way you see the optimization, where you understand what's really jarring for your customers, for your operations, for your processes. That's where the AI needs to be exposed. So yeah, short answer to a long question and a long answer to a short question is confidence and trust and permission to do so.
Yeah. And as you say, there is a lot of that shadow use. And I think that's what's different about this technology, is that it is bottom up rather than top down. And perhaps that's what's missing.
It's a bit of both. I mean, I think you need leadership to lead, but you also need bottom up.
Yeah, you need that strategy, and then, as you say, that sort of micro level sort of operational area.
Yes.
Now, the AI Adopt Centres,
Yep.
they're designed to help small business with their AI journey. So what would a small manufacturer in, say, Bendigo in regional Victoria, if they walked in the door of their local AI Adopt Centre, what would they expect?
They will expect a room full of people that are knowledgeable, have support, and have access to the resources that they need to understand where are they starting from, what's the real problem that they can solve, and what's the roadmap to get there. So many of the Adopt Centres kind of deliver this, not to oversimplify it, but this roadmap process that says, because most people don't know where to start. And certainly most small businesses, if they've crossed the chasm of, I want to do this, they're not still sort of stasis of fear. if they've crossed the chasm, then they don't know where to start. So these adopt centers should help them understand that starting point and then understand the steps to go from there. And you've got kind of specific examples. You've got Arm Hub, which is the one up in Queensland, they're Australian Robotics. And they are really acutely attuned to the issue of data, because in robotics and material manufacturing, access to the data to help feed your model is limited. So they can kind of understand that problem. Whereas something like SMEC down in Victoria is much more about rapid prototyping and kind of figuring out how do you kind of quickly build MVPs and understand what's possible. So, but ultimately, I hope they get a good experience and they get good advice, which is what they should be getting from those centers.
Yeah. And I mean, as I think within any digitalization project, it's trying to understand what are the outcomes you want rather than just digitalizing a very poor analog process.
Absolutely, yes.
So
it's the lift and shift problem from the cloud is there's no value in doing that. You actually have to rethink. And often that's, the same here with AI.
Yeah. And of course, Australian Industry Group and NAIC have been running our AI Industry Connection program for, was it 3 years? About 2 years, I think. Yeah, it's coming up to 3 years.
Must be good if we're doing it for 3 years.
And I think we're going to shape it now to more roundtables and really get into the detail. But from your perspective, what's the pattern you're seeing in businesses that get traction with AI versus the ones that stall?
Well, let me first say, as a bit of a shout out to you all, but it's incredibly useful because we're only a very small agency within the government. We need to reach all of Australian industry organisations, not-for-profits and everywhere. So Australian Industry Group affords us this sort of incredible ability to meet Australia industry where it is. So thank you for that. And please understand how valuable it is to have that relationship. But what I would say when you look at the pattern that we see in businesses that are doing it well, those that are kind of progressing. I'm going to go back to another of my big tech alliteration, three letters, but it's leadership, literacy, and language. So I look at businesses that are leading from the top. To your point earlier about leading from the top and working from the bottom up. Leadership is the direction by which small businesses go. I mean, most small businesses, the leader is very visible, and so you need to see the leader leading into this in order for it to work. So you need that. Literacy. It takes time to learn this stuff. You don't just kind of fire up Copilot tomorrow and go, hey, we're an AI business, we're ready to go. You have to invest in understanding the tools, the differences between one model and another model. Why is this model a reasoning model? This one's a language model. This one's a chat model. Understand all that. And then language, which is probably the most important one, which I feel is it's a personal gripe of mine, is we use the wrong language a lot when we talk about AI. We either anthropomorphize it and we talk about the AI causing problems, or the AI has an issue, or the AI isn't doing that right. And it's not. It's the human operation of a system and a tool that has got AI doing the wrong thing or hasn't put the correct processes around it. So I see businesses that have understood this and recognize that it's how you talk about it and how you talk about it in the context of your business. It's not replacing my people. It's helping my people do better work. It's not, a seat at the table. It's actually just a tool that my people are using. It's that subtlety really defines a business that is kind of taking the right approach to me.
Yeah. And I think, as I said, sort of the skills, sort of more broadly, I've found personally by having to really tighten up my commands to Copilot, I think it's also it's sharpened up my requests to my colleagues because, when AI comes back with rubbish, I think, that's not what I wanted. And then I realize I have to be more specific. So it's actually
totally
conversely improved all sorts of communication skills. Now, there is that famous line a lot of people use, AI won't take your job, but someone using AI will. Do you buy that line, or is the reality for Australian industry a little bit more uncomfortable than that?
No, I don't buy that line. I mean, it's a great quip. It's a great media quote. It will persist on forever. No, I believe that we have all the agency here. I think that we are too easy. We're very lazy. It's easy to just throw it away and go, well, what can I do? It's AI. It's not, I can't control it. I think that absolutely people should, as we have seen with every single time that a technology, digital or not, has found its way into our life, it will change the way you do a task. It will change the value of that task. It could change the performance, the speed, the time, the scale of that task, but the task still gets done. The job still gets done. what happens here is you as a human, you can either abdicate your willingness to be a part of the process, or you can dive in and figure out how does this tool make me a more valuable resource in the system. And so, no, I don't like that phrase at all.
Yeah. When I'm thinking about, the system and agentic AI and sovereign capability and what our AI plan is, NAICS materials describe us as being at the beginning of agentic AI. It's been around for a little while now. So moving from AI doing tasks to AI taking initiative end to end. And we've heard about that at our press club event in November from Dux. That was a great example. How seriously should Australian Operations Director be taking agentic AI in their sort of planning for the next year?
Well, it's such a weird thing to talk about timescales in AI because, if we reflect on the fact that ChatGPT is 4 years ago, yet it would seem like an abacus to what we consider to be the AI tools we use today. There is this dichotomy of time. You say it was only, I say we're in the early stages of agentic, we're deep in it. I would say to anyone that right now that I would just don't get caught up by the hype. Don't try and jump in the fast moving river. Like there's so much happening in AI. It's happening so quickly. And there's a sort of a tendency for businesses to want to get onto the latest thing and be up on the latest thing. But there's actually a journey of kind of exploration and understanding on this AI. And agentic AI is entirely different to chat AI, to probabilistic AI, to reasoning AI, to all these other things. And it creates entirely different challenges, risks, and it may not actually be what your business needs. So I would just take a moment, have a think about it. Don't try and figure out what can you do with agentic AI, but really get back to this. What data challenges do I have? What information blockages do I have? Where could I be leveraging what I have in smarter ways? And, how can I help my people achieve more with the customers we have? And then figure out whether it's agentic or not. But yeah.
Well, gives me an opportunity to give one of my favorite quips, which is people don't buy AI, they buy a solution to a problem.
Exactly.
And it may or may not have AI in it. And I think 100%. That's it. You've got to identify the problem first and then work out
100%.
What's the right solution. Now, there is a fear though. I mean, we've talked a lot about fear and risk, but there is a fear that we're just consuming other people's models and that we don't have enough Australian capability. I know that's, I think you would have a firm view on that. Where is the Australian capability, and is there enough going into building Australian AI firms?
Well, I'm glad you didn't use that S word that everyone likes to talk about when it comes to AI, and I won't even say it, so we don't even catch it in the notes of the podcast. Look, I think that there is not a valuable market opportunity for Australia to try and compete in the market that is dominated by significantly large tech vendors today. There's no reason to do it now. There wasn't a reason to do it in the cloud era. There hasn't been a reason to do it in the mobile phone era. It doesn't mean that we're inequitably a part of this ecosystem. But what I think is the gap for Australia today is this technology per se, forget the model vendors and the providers and who exists out there in the market. The technology offers us some unique value and opportunity. There are things that we could be doing better as a nation that lean into our unique data, our unique industries, our unique location in the world in terms of the businesses that thrive here and the sort of mechanisms by which we trade across the world. That's where Australia needs to lean into what I would call our AI, which is what are we going to build that no one else has, that is unique to us, that will bring value to our ecosystem, but actually is a commodity that we can sell to the market, versus this idea that we must have an alternative to OpenAI. I think in the early days, people would have said, yeah, okay, Australia needs its own GPT. But I think now we're saying Australia needs to capitalize on the opportunity that this technology provides. And that should be, so I nearly said the word then, that should be ours. That should be something that Australia owns and Australia operates, and we get value from. That I do agree.
Yeah. And I think if you think about things where we are internationally competitive, it's particularly in those highly regulated segments. So food, skincare, medical devices, things that go in or on the body.
Yes.
Where there's a lot of regulation. And then I think that's where we can leverage that strength. And, Heidi is a good example. My husband's in allied health and he uses Heidi. That's a nice Australian AI product used in medical transcripts that I think it builds on the strength of our highly regulated market and then is able to to go to the market with it.
We're world leaders in healthcare, in agriculture, in education, a whole bunch of sectors.
Yeah.
We should be. The key thing here, Louise, is AI has become a sort of a verb to describe this thing, but it's actually an ecosystem, and there's many, many parts of that where your value can be derived. It's not about just the chips, the network, the infrastructure, the data centers, all the models. It's a whole bunch of that, and we can derive value in different parts of that.
Yeah. And you mentioned data centers and that infrastructure, energy, land use, all those sorts of things. It's filling the press right now, and that debate. I know NAIC's doing some thinking around what are the expectations on how data centers can deliver benefits, how do they balance the energy, water and land use. Where do you think we're at now, and what's the message for industry?
Well, I want to be careful here because obviously these are actually, these are the government's initiatives and we're just agents of the government, and we want to support that. But yes, the government is very much alive to both the opportunity that having infrastructure here provides. There is economic value in having those organizations build and work and operate here, creates jobs, creates wealth and creates activity. But doing that in a way that makes sure that it brings benefit into Australia is the political balance that they're trying to drive there. I think the way to think about it, at least to take off the sort of the specifics of the political challenges that are faced today, is look at it from the point of view of where Australia sits in the globe. In terms of that, we think about the world in its three segments of the sort of the EMEA, the US, and Asia. And think about where we sit not just in Asia, but also in South Pacific, and the responsibility we have as a wealthy, democratic, westernized nation sitting in this place with access to land, access to energy, access to the ability to negotiate with the world on these terms. It's almost an obligation on us to do the right thing, but also do the right thing for the region and for our South Pacific partners as well.
Now, we're almost at time, Lee, so a couple of last questions. What one book or podcast would you recommend an Australian executive to read to get an idea of AI?
Oh, my goodness, that's a tough one. I don't know. I'm going to bail and say I don't have any one in particular. I've just finished reading Nexus by Yuval Noah Harari, which is not really about AI. It's about information systems. If you like his kind of writing, it's a good book. What I would counter that is I would say to anyone right now, read as much as you can, from as many diverse sources as you can, and read. I tend to focus on Substacks and modern information because the stuff changes so quickly. If you're reading a book, I guarantee you it's already out of date.
Yeah.
If you're reading information and you're not sort of caught up in the information vacuum of one person's point of view, you'll get there. I read a whole bunch of them. There's Transformer, there's The Rundown, there's Gary Marcus's Substack. I just try and get a balanced view.
Yeah. When I was invited to join the CSIRO think tank on AI, which is a precursor to NAIC,
yes,
and I thought, I better, I remember saying to Ines, I really think I need to do a bit more reading before I start talking. But I did read Machines Behaving Badly by Toby Walsh,
yep,
which is, of course, before ChatGPT, but it did help me really understand a lot of the sort of system. So,
yep.
Yeah,
there's lots of good books out there for foundational knowledge. But if you're trying to stay present, I think books are hard way.
Yeah. No. And finally, where can our members go to plug into NAIC's work, other than through our workshops?
Well, through our workshops, through the events that we co-coordinate, and hopefully we will continue to do many more of those. Very simply, ai.gov.au. That is the home that we launched a month and a half ago. We're bringing everything together there: case studies, practical examples, team templates to bring your team on board, skilling access, everything you need. If it's not on there, go on the feedback and tell us what's missing, but otherwise it should all be on that website, ai.gov.au.
Great. Thanks very much, Lee.
No
and
worries.
Thanks very much for listening. If you found this on our website, you can subscribe on your usual podcast platform. If you have any questions or feedback, please do email us at industry.policy@australianindustrygroup.com.au. And we'll speak again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.